regards
This
to
conference will now be recorded.
with all the economic and factors that are on the news all the time, uh, those that are getting sick and everything, all the devastation that's coming with that. But we haven't heard a lot on the mental health aspect with this pandemic. So this is a very timely topic, and we're glad that we can have Josh present. Um, just wanted to give a little bio on Josh. Dr. Francis has over 20 years of clinical counseling experience working in community mental health, hospitals, schools, and private practice. He is licensed as a professional clinical counselor supervisor and licensed independent chemical dependency counselor clinical supervisor in the state of Ohio. Dr. Francis has owned and operated a private counseling and consultation practice and is an associate professor of clinical mental health counseling at Wright State University in Dayton. Dr. Francis's clinical specialties and areas of research include child and adolescent mental health, marriage and family therapy, high conflict divorce, trauma, counselor ethics, counselor wellness, evolutionary primal mental health, and substance and process behavioral addictions. He is a frequent presenter at local, state, and national conferences, and we are just so lucky to have Josh here to present on such an important topic. So, Josh, without further ado, we'll let you kind of take over and present. So, thanks again.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and thanks for having me. I am glad to be here because as hopefully my bio speaks to a little bit, I've been doing this for a long time, and I feel very passionate about this topic. You know, just a preview to set the table a little bit is as we've gone through this and have been dealing with obviously priority number one, which has been our physical health. All along, I've been just thinking in the back of my mind, okay, but what about our mental health? And so when I was given this opportunity to come on board and talk a little bit about this, I jumped on it because it is paramount. So let's get started. Actually, my plan today, I'll flip ahead. Let me flip ahead. There we go. Is to talk about a few goals. I'm going to talk a little bit. Actually, I'm going to hope to talk for about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on how many tangents I go down and rabbit holes I jump into. So, but I wanted to provide you all a better understanding of the origin and the components of kind of the emotional mental health fallout to this virus, this pandemic we've been going through. Like I said, it's not just a function of our physical health. Physical health is incredibly important, but our emotional health has such an amazing and powerful tie to our physical health. And so we cannot, should not, need not ignore that. I also want to be pragmatic and help you learn small, practical, but very powerful ways to stay ahead of COVID stress, pandemic stress. There's all these emerging terms that's coming out. That's helping to try to understand and conceptualize the impact of COVID on our mental health through an active and a very practical wellness and self-care plan. And then I also want to just kind of circle the wagons, like pause for a second and have you all reflect and maybe process on, at least in your own mind. We may have a little bit of a time to ask some questions at the end of our session. But to get you to reflect, to pause for a second, to be mindful and reflect upon, okay, yeah, this has been an amazing whirlwind. This has been life-changing, and it has, not has it, but rather to say it has affected me profoundly. So a couple caveats first. Amazing to me and a little disappointing, but I guess to be expected is somehow this pandemic has become very politicized, very divisive, and just fodder for a lot of feeling, a lot of emotion. I think, again, I sort of understand that, but that doesn't stop me from being disappointed by this. So I have a lot of powerful, strong feelings. I've always prided myself on being fairly neutral and objective when it comes to politics, when it comes to controversial issues. But that doesn't mean I'm completely immune to it. So if a editorial or commentary leaks out, forgive me. I also have a history of being more of a holistic practitioner, not so much primary or Western medicine, and so that might leak through too. I do think we have to look at this epidemic through a holistic lens, not just through a Western medicine lens or through a political lens. But again, I'm not immune to that. Okay, caveats aside, I don't know if that covers me or not, but let's hope so. Okay, so let's do like a big overview of this issue. And really ask the question, zoom in on the question of why has this been so hard? So as Jeff mentioned in my bio, over the last several years, I've been looking at mental health as a function of who we are from a biological or an evolutionary or what I call a primal mental health perspective. And that's simply conceptualizing our emotional health from how we're sort of built and designed to deal with things. It's become an increasingly big issue as modern times have moved us away from a lot of doing what we're supposed to be doing and how we're supposed to do those things throughout a long, long, long history of our evolution. But this is not complicated, okay? I've given a wellness talk now for a number of years, and I've always tried to differentiate modern stress. One of the big issues with modern stress is that they trick our primal or our reptilian brain, which I'll go into a little depth in a second. It tries to trick us into thinking that modern stress, hey, I have these bills to pay, I have this deadline, I have this report to write. It tricks that primal reptilian brain into thinking that this is a major, major, major stress, such as there is a famine, there is a warring tribe, or my line for the last several years have been, or there is a plague, there is a epidemic, there is disease. So that was my line prior to COVID, and that the primal brain reacts to modern stress as if there was a pandemic. Well, unfortunately, guess what? We are in the midst of a pandemic. We are hopeful that that is slowing down, but there are elements out there, whether it be the actual virus, whether it be some geopolitical influence or agenda, that's going to be pushing this at least through the summer and maybe even into fall. So that means that our brain, our primal brain, through that evolutionary lens, is on autopilot. And that autopilot says, freak out, worry, obsess, be anxious. Okay, and I'll break down again the biology, but we are built and wired in our DNA, in our hardwiring of our brain to feel stress over this. So it's not a function of, do I feel stress? Of course you do, because your very survival, your biology is saying, hey, be on guard, be on the lookout. And then, of course, we have modern news, we have the media, we have politics, we have these quote unquote experts, of which I don't necessarily claim to be one, but we have modern times taking advantage of very primal, primitive phenomenon, such as a pandemic. And that has created a host of hidden costs that I've been trying to call out all along that we know are going to occur secondary to the physical toll. And that is one of these new terms I said, a stress pandemic. So we have the virus pandemic. We also now have a stress pandemic because of all the financial issues, job loss, bankruptcy, anxiety, so on and so forth. We are going to continue to struggle with a mood pandemic or a depression pandemic that comes along from hopelessness, isolation, despair, malaise, indifference. We'll talk of these terms a little bit more in a little bit. Anhedonia, lack of pleasure seeking. We have anxiety, okay? Exaggerated anxiety, especially if you had anxiety before, you're gonna have more anxiety now, all right? Then a lot of these first world problems, addiction, which we'll talk about, especially addiction to technology. I've been worried about this for years. Now we've been even further connected to or married to technology, whether it be social media, phone, computer, this webinar, which there are wonderful advantages to that because it allows me to be here talking to you in the safety of our homes and offices. But it's not without recourse. There's also other big issues emerging now: family and partner violence, domestic violence, lots of marital issues when we're trapped with our spouse in our house for 2 months. Child-related issues, nutrition issues that are now emerging, educational problems, obviously, an overuse of technology. So there are these emerging problems that are rooted in our biology that we just have to identify and understand and acknowledge and be on guard, okay? So one of the emotional challenges that come along with this is the concept of trauma, all right? Trauma has been finally, I think over the last few years, really given its due course when it comes to mental health. And we have a lot of misconceptions about trauma. So I'm going to try to tie the COVID-19 virus with the fact that we have all been traumatized. And I would make a clear argument that we have been in varying degrees, okay? So what is trauma? Well, trauma is very primal, very evolutionary, very biological. So from a very oversimplistic term, trauma is our brain holding on to information, holding on to things, holding on to events that it thinks can impact our survival and our well-being. Okay, so the classic definition of trauma, which may be a little antiquated, is that ourselves or someone, a loved one, has been killed or injured or threatened in some serious way. So remember, the purpose of our primitive brain is to hold on to information that's going to allow us to survive. It's going to make sure we put ourselves in a best position to live long and prosper, as some Vulcan used to say. So we have, one of the origins of real trauma has been, like I said, disease and what's the word? Not famine, but disease and epidemics. There's in other words, it's leaving me. It'll come back to me. But that's our brains are holding on to that because of a worry about our safety and the integrity and safety of the people we love. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that we have post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, it doesn't mean that we're all a psychological mess, but we know therapists look at the difference between big T and little t, big T trauma and little t trauma. And big T trauma is, many of you may have, some of you may have experienced that. You may have lost someone to COVID. You may have a friend or family member or a relative or a grandparent or a great parent, grandparent who we have lost due to COVID. You have been traumatized by that, no doubt. You may not know anyone who's been impacted by this, but you're watching the news, you're hearing the stories, you're seeing the websites, you're listening to the politicians, and all of those messages are reinforcing this idea that you're in danger, that you are being threatened, and so you have to be on guard. Okay, so I think it's much better to say, yeah, we have been through, my children have been traumatized. Doesn't mean wiped out, it doesn't mean mentally unstable, but we've been traumatized by all this chaos and all this stress. So I've hinted around to a couple of these phenomenon, but let's do a little bit of a dive into this. So one oversimplistic way of looking at our brain is at the very core part of our brain, the brain that is the least developed, that is the oldest part of our brain. Our brain has grown up and grown out over the last several hundred thousands of years. That part of our brain is what governs stress. Okay, so I already made the argument that pandemic stress, disease stress is one of the most powerful stresses because our brain is constantly saying there is danger out there, and that danger is coming at us in terms of people and germs and things we touch. And so I always use the analogy, I'm dating myself here, but the crocodile hunter, Steve Irwin, when he had his show on years ago now. But anytime he was around a dangerous animal, a snake or a crocodile, he'd always say, danger, 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 right? Our brain is broadcasting that constantly. All right, so the reptilian brain, the primal brain, sort of takes over in times of high stress. So the core of our brain, and one of the organs there is the amygdala, and that's like the little kid, the scared, fearful little kid. And then the prefrontal or the neocortex, as our brain grew up and grew out, is more of the adult that tries to reason with the little kid. But when the little kid has such high volume and high intensity, it's hard for reason to win out. So the purpose of stress, it's very primitive. It's all about survival. Okay, the primitive part, the primal part of our brain wants us to survive and is working overtime to keep us out of danger and to have us on guard so that we do not face that danger. Okay, and we'll break down where and how that really messes with us. But here's the problem, is that the primal brain, the primitive reptilian brain, doesn't tell the difference. It can't respond to reason very much, because you could be in your house, you could be safe, all of your family members are fine, you're not exposing yourself to a lot of fears, and you can try to say that. Again, talking to, let's say, a 5-year-old kid, my 6-year-old son, he doesn't understand this, and so he's really worried. I can try to talk to him like a parent or like a therapist, but his little brain isn't always going to understand that, especially when the volume in his brain or the volume in the primal part of our brain is super loud, saying worry, 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 be anxious. That's one of the major challenges. So let's as I read through this list of things that I've seen clients, things that research has indicated, things that are pretty clearly typical responses to what we call COVID stress. So just be thinking, is this me? And have I felt this? So clearly, lots of worry and anxiety and obsessive thinking. That's our primal brain saying, there is a problem that needs to be solved. Keep trying to solve it. That's why we wake up at 3 a.m. and can't get back to sleep. And we'll talk about sleep in a second. Obviously, financial fears and concerns, right? It says many ways wreck the economy. Fears around our health, your health, and the health of loved ones, especially if you are yourself or your family members or loved ones are members of vulnerable populations. Lots of feeling of being on edge, irritable, cranky, or short with people. That's a low frustration tolerance is also on the list here. Like, you get easily frustrated. I think I've struggled with that the most, like getting frustrated, not necessarily for any reason. Feeling depressed, feeling sad, feeling low, not just depressed. Depressed has this clinical concept to it, but feeling like less energy, apathetic, like you just don't care, unmotivated. Anhedonia is a clinical term that says the things that we used to get pleasure and happiness out of just doesn't turn us on anymore. It doesn't give us that feeling, that passion anymore. Also can be feeling detached or surreal, or what we call depersonalized. Like, this isn't weird. This is weird. This is not real. Like, this detachment from reality. A lot of times we have to wrestle with a lot of conflicting issues. You know, a lot of us have grandparents, great grandparents that are in nursing homes, and are put in this position of a terrible decision to make, which is, do I meet with grandma? Do I not? Do I expose her to that? She's saying she doesn't care. She's saying she wants to see me no matter what. I mean, putting us in positions to make really difficult decisions. Lots of existential stress, meaning, like, what's the point of this? Questioning things, all of a sudden becoming paranoid. I find myself dipping my toe into the conspiracy theories every now and then of this, and like, hold on. But again, brain's working overtime trying to figure this out, and it's going to go to far reaches sometimes to do that. Sleep's a huge thing. I'm going to come back and talk to it. It's a tremendous barometer of our health, and many, if not most, if not all of us have been struggling with sleep because of this, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. We need to mitigate it, but it's not a fault of ours. It's this pandemic. Distracted, poor concentration. Okay, obviously there's a biological function for that. We become what I call emotionally constipated. Okay, we shut down because we're all about survival. Same thing with hypervigilance, is we're hyper aroused, we're on edge. That's that irritability thing, because that the primal brain is saying you need to be on edge, because what if a carrier of this illness, a virus, something dirty, some enemy, something comes into our fort, our town, our lives, our house, we need to be on edge. Okay, I'm sure there's others. I would like you to reflect upon, how has this affected my stress? It might be anger and irritability to your kids, to your spouse. Anger is another one that I would point out, that sometimes I'll just get angry for no reason. Yesterday, I gave a similar talk at a mental health agency, and one person I know very well, is being incredibly calm and peaceful, said, yeah, just last week I went through road rage, and I was flipping off this person, 3 miles down I-75. Very, very, very unusual and not like her. But that's what happens when we go through this type of stress. Okay, moving on. And I wish we could have these discussions, but that's one of the limitations of webinar, is that it limits us. So the problem is that it doesn't just affect us emotionally. So we know there's this major brain-body connection. We know there's this incredibly strong relationship between how our brain and our emotion functions and how our body functions. And so using that knowledge that I just talked about the primitive brain, the primal brain, the brain that wants us to stay on edge and on guard, ask yourself the question, when the body is in a state of pandemic stress, it's not going to want to, right? Because when it's in a state of pandemic stress, it's going to want to survive, to problem solve, to be on edge. So what is it not going to want to do? It's not going to want to sleep, right? Because when we sleep, we are vulnerable. There can be a person, a stranger from another village, coming into our village, coming into our home. That is dangerous. There is a problem, a plague that needs to be solved. And so our brains are going to work overtime on that. Problem with sleep is that it is a vicious cycle. The more stressed out we get, the worse we sleep, the worse we sleep, the more we get stressed out. So I'm going to come back to sleep. When the body's in a state of pandemic stress, it's not going to want to relax. It's not going to want to be calm. Okay, it's going to want us to go back to our basic responses to danger: fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, we want to problem solve. We want to figure this out. When the body's in a state of pandemic stress, it's not going to want to relax. It's not going to want to breathe deeply. Okay, when we find ourselves, quick intervention, when we find ourselves in a state of stress, take a deep breath in through your nose, hold it for a second, out through your mouth. It's so quick, it's so instantaneously. Do that 3 times. It doesn't mean you're going to feel completely better, but you are going to send your primal brain a message of like, relax, chill out. That danger is not immediately upon me. It's coming, it may come, I need to be aware, but it's not here right now. When we're in a state of pandemic stress, we're not going to want to be intimate, okay, emotionally, physically, with people, with our loved ones, with our children. We're not going to want to engage. We're not going to want to connect. We're not going to want to be mindful. All these things I'm going to talk about, we need to do more of. We're not going to want to do those things because, again, it needs to deal with a problem. We're not going to want to communicate very well, especially calmly and rationally. We're not going to want to be rational. And you know what? There are entities out there, the news, the media, that prey upon that. We know we're not going to be rational. So, one of my biggest regrets with this is that it's pulled me back into this political world, which I've tried to distance myself for the last several years. And so I still have my favorite news aggregate sites, the clicks that I like to link to that give me a quick news flash, and one which I will refuse to look at. This is about 3 weeks ago, in the middle of a lot of the hysteria. Was headline of this news site was, new evidence suggests that the coronavirus could reach the space station. I was like, oh man, Really, that's what we need to worry about on top of everything else, is this virus is so, and you know, when you break it down, I'm sure there was a scientist somewhere saying, yeah, this is very contagious. And if we're sending supplies across the world and even to the space station, it could reach that. Do we need to worry about this, the coronavirus reaching the space station? So that's an example of the news taking advantage of our primal irrationality to the epidemic. So longer term effects are profound as well, the psychosomatic things. So we know stress reduces and lowers our immune system functioning, which is the exact opposite of what we want to do right now. Okay, we want our immune system to be healthy and active, and we want the least amount of stress that we can feel right now. Okay, the stress chemicals, adrenaline, cortisol, they're very inflammatory. They rev us up, they tax the body. I'm not a medical doc, but that said, it is toxic for us to be in a long-term state of stress. Our digestive systems, our excretory systems, our reproductive systems, all of our body systems don't work as well, don't function normally. And it leads to terrible things, which again, could be as worse, if not worse, than the COVID problems, okay? So recognize that this is stressing us out, and we have to proactively minimize that stress to live happy and healthy through these times. Speaking of these times, what the world and technology creates for us is lots and lots and lots of unhealthy ways to cope, okay? And so like the picture suggests, we're on the end of the branch and we are self-sabotaging by turning to these things. Turning to these things to make us feel better, to give us a break from the stress, to feel pleasure, because we're not feeling a lot of pleasure right now. We turn to these things, and in moderation, they can be wonderful. Outside of moderation, they can be very dangerous, okay? So, such as food. Now, another new term is the Corona 15. You know, we heard about the freshman 15 pounds that you gain when you're a freshman in college. You know, we have the Corona 15 because food all of a sudden becomes a center point of our lives. You know, it's, hey, what are we going to make for dinner tonight? Which has some good sides too, especially if it involves cooking and connecting with our food and our family and so on and so forth. But it's hard to limit that, right? We also have substance use, substance abuse. So early research saying alcohol sales are off the roof, okay? Super increases in alcohol sales. We know other drugs, unhealthy drugs, street drugs, the rates of use are higher. Overdose deaths, unfortunately, are collateral damage. We turn to things to give us short-term relief. It's natural, it's understandable, but we have to limit it. Then we have all the vices that go along with modern times. There's gambling online, television and news, which again, pulls you in and wants to sensationalize. The internet, endless shopping, endless gaming on the internet through technology. Social media, a great place for support, but also a place for a lot of drama and histrionics or animosity. So we got to try our best to limit that. Our children too. So they're not in school, they're connecting to technology more and more. We have to monitor that, all right? And we have to be able to try to mitigate these kind of things, okay? Because it can be tough. So, you know, again, years ago, actually for Phelan, probably 3 or 4 years ago, I talked about technostress, being overly stressed with technology. I've done a host of presentations and research on my worries, my fear of overusing technology. I did one with a local school a few months ago in which we're looking at the dangers of technology. Well, now these current events have compelled us to use or overuse technology even more. And so a big part of this talk is we got to keep this in check too, okay? Because current times are compelling us to use technology, but it's going to potentially lead to some bad things, okay? To addictive and compulsive use. Now it's more necessary than ever, but it is built and designed. Elements of technology are built and designed to be addicting, flat out, period. Some of the best research social psychologists, marketing researchers from the elite universities in the United States and across the world are being actively recruited. This has a conspiracy theory tint to it, but it's proven that some of the best psychologists, researchers, minds in the world are being recruited by Facebook and Google and Instagram and Snapchat and all these tech, and Apple and Microsoft, to make our relationship with technology more addicting. That's their job. I mean, they're not hiding from this. It's like, yeah, we want you to use your phone. We want you to buy the new iPhone every year that it comes out. We want you to use your technology more and more. You know, one of the things that I'm trying to be objective, you know, is you always want to ask if there's an expert, if there's someone in the media who comes out with a new claim, and this goes both ways. You have to ask yourself, well, what are they objective on this? Are they unbiased? And I don't have any negatives to say about Bill Gates, but the fact that he's becoming an expert on a pandemic, while he has everything, he has a lot to financially gain from this. And that could be great. His intentions could be wonderful, but we have to stop and say, okay, could one of his intentions, even a subconscious intention, being to bring us even more into this technological world and potentially more of an addictive and compulsive world? Okay, just to be aware of that. Social media, talked about that. This has pulled us into that. I forever have called it, it's more anti-social media, because I don't see a lot of really positive social stuff happening there. So we just have to monitor it, especially our children. There's lots of cool apps to monitor our tech use. That's important to do. We should do that. Okay, we should do that regularly. And then recognize and understand the dangers of technology, overuse of technology, physical and emotional. I threw up a virtual addiction test, and I wanted to go through just a couple highlights, just to get you thinking about your relationship with technology. And I try to go through this too periodically, talk about this with my wife and my children. So just to highlight it, I don't want to go through all this, but it's online, it's readily available. It's called the virtual addiction test. And so a couple questions just to get you thinking. Do you feel the need to use the internet with increasing amounts of time in order to achieve satisfaction? We call that tolerance. I'm like, okay, I used to like to get online for 10 minutes. Now I'm finding myself getting online for hours. Number 4, have you ever tried to cover up or minimize the time you spend online? This is my kids all the time. How long, what have you been on your phone? Just a few minutes. Okay, let me check. It's a few hours. Have you ever gotten angry when someone's disturbed you while you're online? That happens to me, and I write it off as being, oh, I got an email to write, or I'm watching this for school or for whatever. I'm like, okay, just a second, I'll be with you in a second. Or, hey, be quiet, getting mad. Have you ever done that? You often lose sleep due to late night logins. Bad. Okay, I'm guilty there. Okay, but are you checking your phone? Are you looking at your tablet? Are you watching Netflix in bed? Are you looking at the news prior to bed? Bad. What it does is it stimulates that primal evolutionary reptilian brain, especially if it's looking at the news and seeing something about the pandemic. Last thing you want to do right before you go to bed, okay? Because that's the equivalent of 100,000 years ago. I'm tired, I'm going to go to bed. Oh, I hear someone prowling in the woods right outside of our village. I think I'm just going to fall asleep and not worry about it. That doesn't happen, okay? The news stimulates and triggers that part of our brain. The last one, do you stay online longer than you originally intended? Okay, do you ever say, okay, I will do this work, or I'll get on Facebook until 11 o'clock, and before you know it, it's 12:30, and you just spent another hour and a half longer than you wanted to. So read through these things, ask yourself some hard questions. Is this me? Is this something that I need to monitor? Because again, we're being compelled to use this more and more during these weird times, but there's a throwback. There is danger there. All right, so hopefully I made the argument that the problem exists. So what do we do about it? Okay, so we've got about 15, 20 minutes. What do we do about it? So we're not going to avoid it. I mentioned that. we can't, okay? We can actually use it to our advantage because it can prompt us to change, but it's not to avoid it, it's just to manage it. Recognize it, being aware of it, and manage it. Be on guard, see how it affects you. What is your personal COVID pandemic stress response? All right, not everyone's the same. Lots and lots and lots of biodiversity here. Everyone's going to be different. Be proactive, create a plan, stay ahead of it. Prevention is key. I know it's hard, we're 2 months into this, but we could be several more months into it, left into it. So keep trying to prevent this from getting you at a deep level. Look at my plan, my emphasis on a holistic integrative care movement. Recognize that, learn from people, learn how you can holistically help yourself, your mind, your body, all the life domains we'll talk about, and develop an active coping mechanism, an active coping strategy that's going to defend us a little bit from this, okay? Ultimately resulting in taking care of yourself. Take care of yourself, take care of those around you. So how do we do that? So this is just an overview. This is kind of from the 10,000 foot view. This is my wellness slide I've been giving for years, and it holds more true now than ever, all right? Make these things a priority. One of those being, do more of what we're built and designed to do as people, as human beings, as social creatures, all right? The virus is pulling us away. It's creating these relationships with technology, these remote relationships, but we have to stay true to who we are and what we're built and designed to do. And I'll talk about some pragmatics there. I'm a big fan of some sort of organizational system. Now more than ever, we need to read and we need to write things down. I'll talk more about sleep. I can't talk about enough. We have to try to get good sleep. We have to focus a little bit on a healthy nutritional diet, and we have to keep moving, all right? Another side effect of being in front of our computer is, we're sitting down usually while we're on the computer. We have to look, cherish, embrace our support system, and we have to continue to search and find meaning, inspiration, purpose, and passion in our life, even when at times in which that has been taken away from us in many ways. And then the thing I already talked about was looking at our relationship with technology, looking at a digital detox, or at least monitoring our relationship with tech. So I've talked about I'm a big fan of looking at our life through the lens of these 6 different life domains. And so I just want you to reflect upon, another thing would be, well, how has the pandemic affected these 6 parts of my life? Okay, I'll describe them real quickly. So our physical health, how have you been feeling physically? Have you gained that 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds? Have you been exercising enough? How's your physical health due to the pandemic? Our emotional health, moods, anxieties, mood swings, anger, irritability, our mental and emotional and psychological health. How has it impacted me? Our intellectual health is our hobbies, our interests, our passions, our pursuits, the things that turn us on, that give us the fizz, that make us love life. Okay, how's it affected that? Our relational health, our social health, we know it's affected this profoundly, right? That we've been cut off from people, some of us significantly. So our relational, social part of our lives is profound. Those are our close family members, those are our friends, those are our our community. How's this affected that? Our spiritual and existential health. This is a tough one. I see a client who was a daily mass goer, went to Catholic Mass every day. Well, however many weeks ago now, it was, no more Mass. She went to church every day for, I think it's 26 years. And just like that, she was cut off from that, okay? That's profound. And then lastly is our occupational and our financial health, okay? A lot of us get a lot of meaning out of our job and rely heavily upon the financial contributions that a career or a job gives us, and that has been completely, potentially thrown upside down in many people's lives. So the equalizer, the old Star Trek equalizer on the right, ideally as these different life domains go up and go down, We need to compensate for those things. So right now, our relational health may be low. We need to kick it up with our physical health, with our emotional health, with our intellectual health, with different elements. Our spiritual health might be down. We got to compensate in other areas. Okay? So we have a battle, right? We have a battle in our brain. We talk a lot about what can we control, what can we not control when it comes to this pandemic. We can control our thoughts. We can control our perspective. We can control our attitude, and we have to win that battle in our brain, all right? I want you to recognize the power of your perspective, the power of attitude, the power of optimism. Are you going to be empowered through this time? Are you going to look for those silver linings? Are you going to find the right perspective to take on that? Or are you going to be defeated by that? Are you going to feel powerless? We have control over that. Not complete control, but we have a lot of control over that. Something that I want you to consider is the placebo effect. The placebo effect is in its origin was, if you take a pill, a medication, this is an oversimplistic view, take a medication, you feel the positive effects of that medication may be because you think it's going to help you. So consistent research has shown that about 50%, half of all therapeutic effects of medicine are because you think it's going to be helpful. So what I'm worried about is that in this time of pandemic, especially with the news telling us this, the hysterics and the what someone called panic pornography, like the news source feeding off of the panic and looking at it as this gross thing that we're all attracted to. What I'm worried about is that if the news and everyone's saying, if you get this, you will die, oversimplistic, then when we do, if our grandparents, if we do get sick, we're automatically going to think, oh my goodness, this is terrible. I'm going to feel A, B, C, D, and E, and I might die. I might be on a ventilator. I might have a hard time breathing. Now, those things might happen because they're functions of the virus. But when you go into that, creating that reality in your head, then you could exacerbate, worsen those symptoms. The brain has the power to do that, okay? It's also a function of confirmation bias. Hey, I've been exposed, I'm going to get sick, I am vulnerable, I'm going to have it bad if I get it. Well, you probably will, because you're telling yourself you probably will. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy too. So I encourage people to be reasonable and be rational, but there's emerging evidence to suggest that actually this has been around since January in the Miami Valley, is what new research has said. Other people have said it's been at least early March, definitely in February. So I don't have anything wrong with, and I encourage my friends, my loved ones, my clients to say, hey, I was sick in January, if they were indeed, I'm not asking them to fabricate things, but I was sick in January. I had some symptoms. I could have had, or some people that I knew had some symptoms. For you to say, I could have had this virus in early February. I may have, and if I did, I may have developed an immunity to it. So if I get it, I believe, if I didn't, but maybe I did, if I get it, I think I'll be fine. I think I will be happy. I think my body will fight it off, and I will get through this okay. Now, I don't want you to be irrational. I don't want you to be over idealistic, but I want you to feel empowered, because that could be the difference whether or not you have, if you were to get it, especially if it lasts forever, which they're saying it might, you will, we might all get it if we haven't got it already. We will be fine. I want you to tell yourself that, because the power of that belief is profound, okay? Another challenge in the battle of our brains is to cognitively reframe. So say things like, so the difference in this thought process, this can be revolutionary for some people. I have to's versus I get to. So we could easily give into the frustration and say, I have to stay home. I have to not go into work today. I have to be around my kids all day long, versus I get to work from home. I've been dreaming about this for years. I get to have weeks now in which I can have a positive influence on my children and be around them. I get to have dinner with them every night instead of 1 or 2 nights a week as we're shuffling in between sporting events. okay? Another thing, another cognitive exercise. What will I regret the most when this is over? What will I look back on and say, man, I had 2 months, I had 4 months, I had 3 more weeks that I could have done this. I could have started this project. I could have planted this garden. I could have learned to play this instrument. I could have done all these things. And then lastly, when it comes to the battle of our brain, another great question is just to reflect upon this. What have we been doing or doing more of over the last several weeks due to COVID that are absolute blessings? And I probably would have never have gotten a chance to do them if this didn't happen. All right. And I think if we reflect upon those things and connect with those things, it's going to change our perspective because those things can be profound. I'm having dinner 7 nights a week with my children. I probably never have done, I did not. We didn't do that 7 nights a week. You know, again, fighting with all the other crazy schedule issues. That's the battle in our brain, and that's the battle that you have to win. So I'm going to break down, kind of winding down. There's a couple slides I want to cover, and I label these as let's do more of, do mores, and then do lesses. All right. So what I want you to do more of, I just want you to do these things, try these things, do some of these things if you haven't already. Write things down, create daily lists, goals, to-dos. Write that down. Stick to a schedule, have a plan, have a routine. All right, I've always been a big fan of journaling, and I'll continue to be a fan of journaling, especially through these times. Do more of sunlight. Get in the sun, get outside, move, exercise, especially outside. Ongoing powerful research that sunlight, vitamin D affects our moods, our immunity, on and on and on. Engage in task-oriented activities. Build something, create something, plant something, grow something. We're telling the dumb primitive part of our brain that clearly we don't expect death, imminent death, because we're making things, we're creating things, we're doing things, okay? Do more, get healthy sleep. Don't look at your phone before bed. The best sleep aid is a good fiction book in bed, engages the dream state and the eye movement thing, and his research has consistently shown it helps us get to sleep better. Do more cherishing relationships, being mindful, being intentional, and being present in those relationships. We know now how fragile life is. We know now how every time we see our grandma or our uncle or our child, that might be the last time, okay? Hopefully not, but that possibility has been ever present. Focus on that and cherish all of those minutes. Be more grateful. Gratitude is powerful, powerful, powerful. Right, feeling crappy. Write a list of things that we have that are positive, okay? Write things that we're grateful for, write strengths, write assets, all right? Don't give in to all the things we don't have. Healthy escapes are good too. This is where technology is our friend as well. Books, movies, Netflix, and moderation, okay? Most importantly, get things out. Emote, that means express. The more negative emotions we have coming in, the more they have to come out. We have lots of negative emotions coming in, thank you to the pandemic. We have to have a lot of negative emotions or a lot of any kind of emotions coming out. Okay. Then these are things I want you to do less of, okay? Do more of the previous behaviors. Let's try to do less of these. Try to do less isolating. Easier said than done. Do everything you can to avoid isolating, especially if you are in a population or your lifestyle, your family, or the period in your life right now is isolating just by its very nature. Do less sitting. Unfortunately, the relationship with technology has us sitting all the time. Monitor less in social media. Like I said, in technology, especially in the forms of social media and especially in bed. Do less news. Do less media. The old saying, panic sells, but calm saves. There is this panic porn out there that wants to pull us in. That's what gets clicks. And the headlines are terrible. So you got to mitigate that. So you want to look at the news, you like to stay ahead of things, do that, but limit that. 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes late afternoon, not evening, not before bed. Limit, do less politics. It's just, again, I can't understand how this became a political thing. I think, unfortunately, it's just a reflection of how divisive our current political system is, and that's sad. Do less worrying, ruminating, and obsessing. So a couple things you can do is ask yourself a couple questions. What control do I have over this today? What control do I have over it this week? And if it's no control, then any energy you devote towards that worry is a waste of time. Do less worry about the too distant future. So again, next month, next year, this fall, later this summer, we've got no control over that. Okay, so what control do I have over it now? And if it's no or very limited, then try your best to let go of. Do less deficit thinking. Okay, this pandemic has compelled us to think of all these things that we cannot do. I was talking about earlier. I can't go here. I can't go to this restaurant. I can't do this. I can't see this person. Okay, I can't, all these civil liberty things that a lot of people are questioning. Yeah, I get it. But focusing on what you can't do, deficit thinking, can be incredibly toxic and frustrating and depressing. Even more pragmatic things. Do less caffeinating. Some of us are relying more than we normally would on caffeine, coffee, because we're not sleeping very well because of this. We're also napping more. A lot of my clients are finding are not sleeping well, therefore they're napping during the day. And the problem with napping too much, over 20 minutes, is that you mess with your sleep-wake cycle. And so the brain thinks, okay, if I slept from 3 to 5 in the afternoon, that come 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, it's not going to want to sleep again. Okay? So these are some things to do more of and to do less of. Okay, that's a lot of the material that I had. So we just got a few minutes. If anybody has any any comments, any super quick questions, we can do that in the chat box if you feel so compelled. I also put my contact information at the bottom there. So that's my cell phone and my business email. If you want to contact me to have any sort of follow-up or discussion, or if you want this PowerPoint, it is being recorded. And I know that's Phelan property now, as long as no one else is grabbing a hold of it. So yeah, a couple minutes. Any questions or comments? Big messages. Thank you. Thanks for. All right. Thank you all.
And the chat box is at the top. You can see. So if you do have any questions, just type them in there. Click on that and type them in there, and Josh will be able to see those.
Yep. And you can always email me with questions as well if there's any kind of follow-up. Okay. Yeah, well, actually, Jeff, maybe you can answer that. Can we receive a printed copy of the slides for handout to employees?
Yeah, if it's all right with you, that's kind of your call. But we
Yeah.
could make sure that we can send those to anyone that would want those, if you're all right with that.
Sure, I will send you I'll send you the PowerPoint. Okay, I want to give people adequate time if they are asking a question, but you have, oh, it's a good question. Carrie asked if I have my kids' journal. Yes, I encourage it. I don't force it. Of my 5 children, 3 of them actively journal. And the best thing that I do there is I journal in front of them. Okay, so they'll see me in the morning, now that I'm home more, they'll see me in the morning having a cup of coffee and writing in my planner in my journal. And then they see me do that usually towards the end of the night. And then throughout the day, I make it a point to say, hey, my journal is in my office. You know, Hazel, can you go get that? And they go get it, and they just see me. So I just try to model that. And then we will have times in which we either read or journal throughout the week. But not like, hey, you have to journal now, but I just try to encourage it and model it. Good question.
Josh, I have a question. How do you monitor, or how does that work with your children and their technology or their devices? What type of system do you use with your kids?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I want to preface it by saying, what I use doesn't necessarily mean what everyone should use, but I do think what everyone should do is they should monitor it, meaning they should pay attention to that. The system that I use, depending on the day, is my wife and I come up with a time frame. So ours is no more on a Saturday, let's say no more than an hour on video games or technology, unless it is something educational. So they can break it down, they have an hour. They can break it down, they can watch 3 20-minute Netflix episodes if they want. But we have a timer, just a microwave timer in the kitchen. They have to ask us if they can get on. We don't frequently say no, but we then say, yes, you can get on for, my son will say, can I play a game on my phone? Yes, 20 minutes, half hour, and then set the timer or set a timer. We watch them set a timer on their phone and we try to pay attention to that. So it's come up with a good time frame, a healthy time frame, and then that's objective. Okay, I'm sorry, subjective. That's subjective, and then try to stick with it, but just be on top of it. Good question. Michelle asked, for reading before bed, you recommend a physical book over a tablet? Ideally, so the newer tablets that are readers, so the Kindles and the Amazon is Kindle, they actually have settings that you can turn it down. I think most tablets do. So if you're going to use a tablet, don't blast the light. We are very, very, very photoreceptive. So when we have light, there's a study that even shined a flashlight on a person, a sleep study, shined a light on the guy's toe while he was in deep sleep, and part of the brain starts revving up. So now that can happen the same thing. Obviously you're not going to read a physical book in the dark, but getting a small book light or even a headlamp, turning it down to where you can just adequately read it. I know we've always been told don't read don't read in dim light, it's bad for your eyes. I don't know if that's very good science, but yes, if you're going to do it, either one, you're going to have light enough. Just make sure you turn it down. Okay, but a good fiction book before bed is oftentimes the best cure for insomnia. Even if you have to go back to, the Harry Potters or really good, engrossing fiction. Don't read about health. Don't read about, wellness. Don't read about stress. Get into a good fiction book. Thanks for those questions. Joy said, what can we do for single elderly people living alone during this time? Man, it's so hard. So hard. So while keeping them safe, I think messages of love, whether that be care packages, whether that be visiting them outside their window, whether that be any use of technology, that's where, these meetings and the Skype stuff and all the things that we're able to do is powerful and convenient. So little things, and unfortunately, we can't do enough. That's the bottom line. We couldn't do enough for them, but just try to doing anything is better than nothing. So we might think, well, if I can't do this, then it's best just to leave them alone. I don't think that's the case. Do little things, but it's hard. Good question. Okay, that's 11. Jeff, if you're okay, we can end there, and then any follow-up, you can send me an email or a phone call. And thank you all for listening. Hang in there with everything. Stay positive. Remember, your outlook and perspective on this could be the big difference between dealing, surviving, and thriving, but ideally thriving during this time. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks again, Josh. Appreciate it. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can still see Josh's information there, or contact us here at Phelan's, and we will definitely help you out as far as giving you information, slides, etc. So thanks again for everybody joining in. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.